Hi everyone, in this video we're going to cover Adobe Substance Sampler. It's part of Adobe Creative Suite, and this program allows you to use your own photographs to create tileable textures for digital models. To get started, we need a photograph to bring into Sampler, and I have some photos on my desktop here. Any of these should work. Some I took around my neighborhood, some I took while traveling, and I think I'm going to use this one I just found on my block. It's a landscape stone, and it has this interesting pattern in this area, and we'll make our first texture from that. And what we want to do is prep the image a little bit, because Sampler likes square images. This image is not square, and it's also rotated a little bit. So I'm just going to clean it up in Photoshop before we bring it into Sampler. So have it open in Photoshop here. So first of all, let's duplicate the layer. And then I'll delete the layer here. Control T to transform it. And then straighten it out a little bit. It looks good. And I don't care about the edges here because we're going to crop that out. And so come up here to the rectangle marquee, and I will hold down on the Shift key to get my area. And when I'm selecting my area, I'm looking for spots that have an interesting pattern on the one hand. On the other, trying to maybe avoid things like this, which are real obvious anomalies in the image. Although we could use we could either get rid of that here in Photoshop or get rid of it in Sampler. But this area looks pretty good. There is one little anomaly here, with this little acorn or something, which I could get rid of here in Photoshop, but I'll get rid of it in Sampler to show you how to use the clone tool there. Okay, so I'm happy with this area. I'm going to go ahead and crop it. So image crop. And I'm going to save it. Sampler image. I did this once before. Just save over this one. So sampler image PNG. And now it's here in my folder. Okay, so let's hop into Sampler and pull this in. Also, I want to note here the image dimension. So my image dimension is, let's see here, 1,846 pixels by 1,846 pixels. And so this is something to be aware of, because textures come in either 1, 2, or 4K flavors. You can also go up to 8K. That's a really large texture. So 1K would be 1,024 pixels. And then we can have a 2K image, which is 20 by 48. And then a 4K image, which is 40 by 96, and that gets pretty heavy. So we kind of want to stay in this sweet spot of 1K. At the same time, or of 2K rather, at the same time, our input image is a little below what it needs to be, but we can upscale it in Sampler. So let's go ahead and come back into Sampler. And you can see here by default that the document is set to 2K, and that's good. But our image will be a little below that, so we're going to need to kind of work with that. So the document size, image to material, let's see, we can, when we convert it using image to material, AI powered, it should upscale the image to 20 by 48. So I don't think we'll have to upscale it here. So let's just go ahead and keep our document size at 2K and then hit import. And then if we want to, we can make a 4K texture down the road. So what you'll see is that when we initiate this process, where a base material is made, the image comes in, it's slightly smaller, but then it's going to get scaled up with image to material here. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and pause it while it crunches this. Oh, nope, it popped in, so good. So here we have our texture. By default, we have this texture ball. We can see the seams here. And so the first thing we want to do, there are all of these things here which we can play with, like the micro details and the ambient occlusion strength. Before we do any of that, let's go ahead and work on the tiling of the image. That's probably the most important thing. As far as the displacement goes, we do have some height scale set here, some displacement quality. But if we want to see actual, let's see, texture on the image, we are going to want to make sure that we have some displacement set here. And when we look at this, let's see if we can, add micro details. Let's see if it's crunching this a little bit more. Large details, let's see if we can bring that up. You see that the image starts to move a little bit. So all of these things are going to work with the image. Now let's go ahead and work on the tiling. So I've adjusted these things a little bit. Let's go ahead and work on the tiling. And to do that, I'm going to come down to the viewer settings and change this from sphere to plane and rotate here using my mouse. And here I can see that my tiling is not so great, right? I have very obvious seams and also have this little nut or acorn in the image, which I need to get rid of. So let's start with tiling the image. Sampler works a lot like Photoshop, where we have layers here, and what you do on one layer affects the things below. And so what we need to do here is add a layer that makes it tile. And in fact, that's one of the really great tiling tools in Sampler, make a tile. This is the one you should always try first. However, it doesn't work very well with this image because it delights it too much and doesn't look real great here. So I'm actually not, we could work with this, and there's some tricks for bringing the color back, but I'm just going to get rid of that. I found with this particular image, the other tiling tool, which is just called tiling. So tiling works better. Now, it doesn't look great to begin with, but what we can do here is in the properties, go to edge, and we can start playing with the threshold. And now that threshold starts to look better, right? So I can, that doesn't look great, but as I kind of move this away from the default, it starts to look a lot more seamless. So I need to find a spot, the sweet spot there. That looks good. I can work with the blur. So that's already looking a lot better. Now I do get the sense of a harder edge here. One thing I could also try is, kind of moving this around a little bit to see if cropping it here, I could hold down on Shift and get square. So that actually seems to help a little bit with that. So that looks pretty good. So just moving in a little bit helped. Now, obviously I have this thing here, this little nut, which is not so great. So to get rid of that, I'm going to want to use the clone stamp. So turn on the clone stamp. And then by default, I'll make this a little bit bigger. By default, where you sample for the clone is going to be based on this dot here. So now that I have that, I can come over here and start kind of moving that around. So you can have multiple stamps within the clone stamp. And what that means is, like, let's say I wanted to do add some red, like down here or something. I can't just move this, let's say here, and start to work down here if I'm happy with what happened up here. Now, what I did up here is actually kind of nice, but you will see that if you're within stamp 1 here, wherever I drag this around is going to, it's going to change what I've already painted, let's say. So I can come over here to the left and hit this handy dandy clone stamp here, and that's going to add a stamp to this overall layer clone stamp. So we're going to have multiple stamps within this one clone stamp layer, and I can add more clone stamp layers down the road if I wanted to. So now that I'm in stamp 2, let's say if I wanted to add some red to the image somewhere else to blur, I could kind of do that, right? Paint in there, and you can see it's kind of painting across, which is nice. Adding some paint here. So this all looks pretty good. Maybe I also think that this kind of arm here looks easy to spot. So I could add another stamp. And what happens if I maybe move my stamp to here and then paint over that, and maybe that makes that a little harder to spot or something like that. So again, if you repeat this a bunch, and you can play with the tiling, you know, here. Let's see, if you tile it more than 2, for example, we can tile it to 4. Of course, you're going to eventually see these elements repeat. But you know, with a tiling of 2, it's not so obvious, and the way that we project the texture onto the digital model, it may not be so obvious as, you know, repeating it a bunch of times. There's something called triplanar projection, which we'll talk about, which allows you to shoot the texture from different angles and blend it together, and so the tiling shouldn't be too much of a problem. So this looks pretty good, and if we wanted our to kind of zoom in and see some of the ups and downs for this texture. And now that we have this base tiling, there are lots of cool stuff that we can do. And I now might change it to our mesh down here, from the plane to something else, maybe like this cloth, so we can see how it's applied to an object. And this is looking pretty good. And what we might want to do here is, let's see here. Let's go ahead and play with some of the filters. What I want to do here is, let's see, look at the layer. So what are some of the cool filters that we might want to play with? I think that, you know, you can start with natural textures that you find out in the world, but then often you might want to recolor them. So one really interesting way to do that is with color replace. And with color replace, you can choose, let's see here, how many colors you would like. No, actually it's not color replace that I want in, although that one's nice. But let's use the color variation. Now this is like color replace, but we can have multiple counts. So color counts, we can start adding in and more colors for replacement. And then you can see down here that it's populating these colors in, and we could now come and sort of, you know, start shifting these colors around, which is really, really nice. And so this is pretty nice. And then as you begin to, change this, right, you can add even more and get some pretty interesting variations here. So that's one pretty cool thing. I will also point out that if we look at Adobe Color, so if you just search for Adobe Color, Adobe has some pretty interesting ways of generating colors. So you can explore and you can get these interesting kind of color palettes, and you could then use the color picker here. And if you had that, let's see, up at the same time here. So let's try to dock this. Could dock that, not docking in the wrong place here. There. And this one, just need to get access to that. We should be able to, if it stops taking over my screen here, about that, we should be able to use the color picker here to start picking. Oops. Does not want to do that. Let's see here if I have this overlapping. Now I thought I did get this to work successfully before, where you could just use this color. No. All right, so that's not going to work. It's going dark. Well, I'm guessing that we could probably, I wonder if this is a website problem or a color picker problem. Let's come up here. No, it doesn't want to find anything outside of the program. That's not very, well, it's not finding anything at all. So that's very odd. I'm wondering if you couldn't get this to work. But the other thing you could do, of course, is you can just download this. You could get the RGBs of these colors, or just eyeball it even, and begin to create colors that sort of use these schemes. So there's some interesting inspiration to be had on color.adobe.com. Okay, so let me go back because there we go. That's looking pretty interesting here. And again, the color count can really change things. So, okay, so I'm going to keep that like this. The other thing we can do is we can expose parameters. And so when we export from Substance, we want to have access to these options in, let's say, Substance Painter. And so anything that we expose, when we export this as a material that we use in Substance Painter, for example, we can then have access to these things and change them. Okay, so once we have an interesting kind of color variation here, we can use another useful layer, which is hue. And some of these you'll recognize from Photoshop. Maybe just search for it here, probably past it, hue and saturation. Okay, cool. And this is a really useful one. I can increase the saturation here if I want it to be more vibrant. And then the hue is going to shift it. So you can kind of play with, you can also desaturate it, but maybe bring up the saturation a little bit, and then you can see like all of the different very quick variations that you can get just by changing the hue. And I think that this is a really interesting way to make your materials to create a variety of color schemes in your materials. Okay, so this is definitely something that we would want to, a parameter that we would want to expose, right? And so I'm just going to bring it back to, I don't know, maybe something like that, which is pretty interesting, and go with that. Okay, so what are some of the other things that we might want to work with here? There's so many layers, and there's so many things that you can do with these layers. We have a texture, but we might not necessarily have a lot of variety to the surface. And so to give more roughness to the surface, we could, for example, use cracks is pretty self-explanatory. Let's add in cracks to this thing, and we're not seeing the cracks. So where are the cracks? We probably need to bring up the... Okay, there's some presets here. So let's try heavy cracks. And now we can start to see these cracks. We're going to do high density cracks, heavy cracks. You can change the crack color. So if I make them darker, or you can even make them red, something like that. And again, the roughness, you can really just start, every layer will have, change the scale of them. All of these layers will have different parameters which you can play with. And these are parameters which you could then expose if you want to change them later on. I can also choose to hide a layer temporarily if I don't want to see it in the stack, or just delete it. And let's go on to some of the other cool ones. So let's see, there's a road. A road should be pretty good. Yeah, so a road, what we can see here is that without this one, so we don't necessarily have a lot of ups and downs to the surface. We hide this one, right? And now when I put in a road, I get these bigger moments of ups and downs. And there are different presets here, like strata, chunks, and rain. more like a kind of linear, as if like water had kind of flowed over the surface for a long time, and carved it out. And then of course you can change the intensity here for all of these things, and also the type. So let's go with chunks. This is pretty cool. The intensity is pretty high. And again, if I take this down to 0, see it's not very eroded. There's also the color, which gives you kind of a dirt color to begin with, but you could also make whatever color for the erosion. And what I'm going to do is maybe make it something not or unexpected. I don't want it to darken the material so much. So something like that. But this is a parameter we can expose. Maybe expose all of these, maybe not that one, but the intensity. And yeah, the road intensity I think is good. So that's looking pretty good. There are all sorts of other things that we can, play around with in here. If we wanted to make, for example, this into, let's look here, like pavement. So we could turn this into like some sort of tile, for example, and there are different sort of tiling options here, which we could work with to kind of carve it up in interesting ways. We could use, so there are several things along those lines, like, pattern. Let's see what pattern does here. Pattern, I have to play with that one more. How about parquet, like a floor? Kind of carves it up. We're not getting much of a seam here, so let's get rid of that. There's probably like a brick wall. That will, right, so this one then turns this into more of a, let's use a different viewer setting here, like this rounded, right? Something like that. And so then again, there's some presets here, but then if you go to the tiling, brick wall, English, checker, yeah, different settings here. So all sorts of things that you can begin to play around with. Another, let's say, nice one might be well, this is kind of an interesting one and maybe unexpected for this material, but we can also perforate it. So if we wanted to poke holes in this material, we can use the, not base material, layer, perforate black dots. And it's going to create some variations here. Taking a minute, maybe I'll pause it. Oh, as soon as I paused it, it created these things. So you can see that there are, yeah, so this one's pretty nice, like lots of small holes, big holes. This one's a little bit more sparse. Maybe I'll grab this one, and you could make more variations from these, but let me just use this one, and I could bring this over. Let's pull our pattern mask here, and then I should, pattern mask. Should be able, oh yeah, okay, here. You can see I can drop it in here. And now this is going to use, okay, the pattern mask. Now, now you can see that like lots of teeny holes. And so I need to bring this back up to 1. And also I need to reverse the invert. There we go. And now I'm getting all of those like random holes. And this is where I could play with the scale. Maybe even the mask size could go up to 2 if I wanted bigger ones. And so something like that works pretty well. And perforation down, up, it kind of pokes them out, down, something like that. And so now I have holes poked into my shape. So that's pretty interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that and talk about exporting our material. And to do that, so we have some presets here or some parameters exposed. That'll be great. And again, there's so many more layers. The best way to see what is going to be cool coming out of a Substance Designer, is a Substance Sampler here, is just to, something that looks interesting, random, like Rust. Come, turn that on and start playing with the filter and see what you get, right? It really depends on the kind of material that you are thinking of making. So I'm going to remove that layer, and I'm not going to export the perforate, so I'll just go ahead and remove that one. And then when we want to save the material, let's go ahead and save this, and I'll just call this all right, I'm back, and I'm looking in my Adobe Substance 3D Sampler export folder, and I can see that I now have my material. And this is something that I can use in Substance Painter, so we'll be talking about that in a future video. Thanks for watching, and good luck.